Good afternoon, everyone. If anyone needs to grab a seat now. That'd be great. Welcome to the 2022 Melbourne Cocktail Festival Symposium. It's fantastic to have you all here today. Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional owners of the land that we're gathering on today. It's so fantastic to have a fully 100% in-person event finally. Though I kind of lie, we're not quite there today. Unfortunately, old lady COVID has struck again, and we've had to make some last-minute changes to our speakers. So instead of Matt Jones from Four Pillars, we have the fantastic James Irvine instead, which is a fantastic replacement. And we have Seb Rayburn, unfortunately, in isolation as well. So he's going to be coming in through Zoom today. But thanks to this giant scoreboard-sized TV, I'm sure he'll be kind of larger than life. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank all of our festival partners and sponsors in Grain Shaker, Four Pillars, Homegrown and Starwood. And a big thank you especially today to ALM, who are supporting today's event. The Melbourne Cocktail Festival has had a pretty good run in the last couple of years, all things considered. We've managed to sandwich events between pandemics, bushfires, lockdowns. So it's really great this year to be able to put together a full program of events, obviously starting today with the industry-focused symposium. The main goal of the festival is obviously to shine a light on the brilliant bars and bartenders who work in Melbourne, and to get bums on seats and bellies up to the bars in Melbourne. So thank you all so much for coming. My name's Tim Viney, by the way. I'm part of the MCF and Worksmith team. And I'm going to shut up now and hand you over to the much more capable Jane Ryan, who's going to look after proceedings for today. So thanks again for coming. Cheers.
And thanks for the intro, Tim. So for those who don't know me, I run Difford's Guide Australia, which these days is a lot more consumer-facing than it used to be. So I don't get out in trade as much, and I don't get to hang out with all you guys wonderful people in the industry. It does mean that most of my days are spent on TikTok, answering questions such as, what can I do with caramel vodka and olive oil? Or even worse, that gin that turns from like purple to blue with tonic water. Everyone's very obsessed with it in the consumer world. But I do get really excited when I get to come and do these sorts of events, primarily because it's really hard these days to get out and see what everyone is up to all across the industry. So when I first started as a drinks writer, it was about 2012, and I got to interview a real old-timer in London, and he was telling me when he was first hired in the early 1980s by Dick Bradsell, before he was famous and had invented the espresso martini, the Wibble, the Bramble. One of his jobs was to go and see what all the good bars in London were up to in one night. So you can imagine an entire industry in one night. And we're talking about just like fresh citrus and good ice. But of course, these days, I would be really worried if any of you told me you were going to do that in Melbourne. I'd be worried for your health. I'd be worried for your finances. And then you've got to think as well, that's just Melbourne. We've then got like Sydney, Adelaide, Brisbane, and I don't know what they're up to in Perth anymore. They probably could have invented a whole new spirit and we wouldn't even know. But my point is that when we get to like gather and share stories and thoughts and rambles and all that, it is really, really good for us as an industry, mostly just because it's too hard, to get out and see what we're up to. And so we've got some really, really good speakers today. I'll be popping in and introducing them, and then we're going to have a chance to ask a few questions after, and just, all get to collaborate and communicate together for one day. So I will now ask Cara Devine to come up. Cara is the manager at Bomba, which is probably enough of a full-time job for all of us, but then she also does Behind the Bar, an amazing YouTube series, and she writes for Australian Bartender. So very busy lady, but please come up and tell us more.
Thank you very much to Melbourne Cocktail Festival for having me, and to Jane for the introduction. And obviously it's so nice to kind of be out amongst the trade again, and just seeing so many faces in one room is still kind of a bit overwhelming. So definitely thank you all for coming along. So that's me. As Jane said, I am a bar manager, a YouTube creator, a writer, and then I just feel like this kind of always gets a little bit skimmed over in terms of my hospitality achievements. I did win Parklands Country Club Waitress of the Year in 2006, so just really happy to be able to put that on a PowerPoint. I started working in hospitality about 16, kind of same as I'm sure a lot of us here, just needed a job, a bit of pocket money. But I didn't really get into it properly until I went over to Canada on a working holiday visa. I wandered into kind of the equivalent of like the Everleigh or Eau de Vie or, just really high-end cocktail bar with my CV being like, I was Parklands Country Club Waitress of the Year 2006, like, why would you not want me? And they very kindly kind of suggested that maybe I didn't have quite enough experience to be on their floor or their bar staff, but they did need a hostess. We obviously don't have that as much here, but in North America, it's such a thing where literally your job is just to stand at the door and greet people. So it's a kind of an amazing vantage point to see the workings of a venue. So especially for someone like me who's pretty green, I just got to see these people, like all of these amazing hospitality professionals every single day, just make people's days better. So, they might be a little bit cranky, the guest with me at the door, obviously a little bit uptight, had a bad day. And I would just see them come in and sit at the bar and get these amazing drinks mixed for them. And, they just left looking lighter, looking happier. It was just such a tangible thing to be doing to make people just have a better day. And so I decided that I wanted to do that. Went back and kind of talked myself into a bar job, which I probably didn't deserve. But did that in Scotland for a little while, and then specifically came over to Melbourne because I just heard about the amazing hospitality community here and the level of bars and service, and I just wanted to be part of that. So thank you to everyone that kind of took me in, and I've been here for about 7 years now. Obviously, I'm still full-time working at Bomba. I've been sponsored there for a while. And then a couple of years ago, the owner of Bomba came to me. His friend from high school, who's a filmmaker, was kind of doing a few things in the YouTube space, just trying to figure out how it all worked. And he thought a drinks channel would be a good idea, but he knew nothing about drinks. So Jesse kind of connected the two of us, and Behind the Bar was born. Obviously, kind of after that, I got a few other kind of opportunities off the back of that. So Bartender Magazine, a few kind of blog posts and things for various brands. And then also just got a book deal with Hardy Grant for a cocktail book. So yeah, it's been an interesting couple of years for sure. But I think the whole thing for me about Behind the Bar has always been that it's a cocktail making YouTube channel for sure, but I do want it to be really grounded in that idea of hospitality. Kind of thinking about, what is good hospitality, and does it mean the same to your average person on the street as it does to us? Like obviously Jane was kind of saying about the sort of questions that she gets on TikTok, and sometimes it can feel like there's a bit of a gulf between us at this kind of like tippity top end of the industry and kind of what your average person feels and expects and wants when they go into a venue. And so how do we sort of bridge that gap and communicate to them and just bring them along on the journey with us? So obviously at the very beginning of the Behind the Bar journey, we sort of had to come up with a mission statement, which definitely felt really weird and corporate to me, never having worked in that space, but it's actually been a really good kind of touchstone just through the last couple of years in terms of how we want to run it and making sure that we make the right decisions for the brand. And so we came up with a safe space for all things bar and booze, sort of, I guess, as a bit of a subheading, never diss a French martini. And that comes from when I did get that job as a hostess in this bar in Vancouver. My first knockoff drink, I sat at the bar, I was like 21 years old. Everyone else that worked there was at least 10 to 15 years older than me. And I sat down and I'm flicking through this menu that's full of like Fernet Branca, Maro Montenegro, Cocky Americano. And I was like, what the fuck? So they were like, what do you drink? And I was like, what's the fanciest drink I can think of? So I was like, French martini. And I mean, even that was really overstating the mark because I was definitely at the like pound a drink, vodka, soda, limes in a club at that point. So they really kind of kindly, again, just, didn't like make me feel silly, just sort of were like, we actually don't have all of the ingredients to make that, but we think you'll make this and we think you'll enjoy this. And they made me a Hendrick's gin sour with celery bitters, and like I'll always remember that drink because it was like savory and like bright and citrusy, and like had all this complexity that I just had never really seen. Had never really seen in a drink before. So, but I genuinely think if they had not been so lovely to me, then I would probably not be standing here in front of you guys today if I'd been made to feel kind of small or silly for asking for that. So yeah, definitely it's something that I've always carried with me in my hospitality career, is just trying not to make people feel stupid because they maybe don't have the breadth of experience that we do. And, I think like we do live in a gourmet bubble. Like most of us, if have a random Tuesday night off, would dine at the kind of restaurant that like a lot of people would only ever go to once or twice a year for special occasions. And I think, if we only kind of ever talk amongst ourselves about how good we all are at this kind of, probably in the top 5 to 10% of bars in the world we're lucky enough to have as our locals, then I just think we're slightly in danger of kind of like chopping off that top of the triangle and making it drift away from everyone else. And so I think it's really important that we do kind of communicate and help people understand the value in what we do, because good food and drink is one of those everyday luxuries. Everyone might not be able to afford a holiday or a fancy car, whatever. Everyone can treat themselves to a nice meal and a nice cocktail every now and again. So the way that we do that at Bomba is generally I have a bit of a no but sort of policy. So I don't have, every single brand or whatever on the back bar, but I always will have something. So if someone asks for a fireball, we give them Melbourne Moonshine apple pie. And they're always super happy. It's more delicious. It's local. They'll usually take a photo of it and they'll be like telling their friends. And then they get to be like, I tried this cool new thing at Friday night. And it actually elevates the experience rather than just kind of a blanket, no, we don't do that here, And so, yeah, I do think that obviously our job is absolutely to be pushing the envelope and trying to elevate those experiences as much as possible for everyone through these kind of events, and just by being really mindful and meaningful about kind of the quality of service and drinks that we're putting out. But I also, think that it has to be communicated in a way that brings people along on the journey rather than making them feel alienated. And of course, we can do that in our venues on a kind of micro scale, but on a macro scale, we've all seen how important in the last couple of years social media has become. And so I think that's now like a really important tool for us, especially, for people who live outside of urban centres. I've been in whiskey tastings and things recently where it's people that, on Zoom, people that are way out in the bush who don't have the luxury of having like the Elysian Whiskey and Ailment Boilermaker House all within a 5-minute walk for them. Or, even just people that have weird work schedules or kids or maybe disabilities or things that means that they can't leave the house as readily as most of us in this room. And they still get to be exposed to brands which are maybe different from, the ones that are like in their local Thirsty Camel bottle, and just that idea that maybe they don't like a margarita because they've only ever had one made with margarita mix, and maybe if they try it with fresh lime, they would kind of get it, So I think in that bringing people along on the journey, obviously if anyone does or is communicating with the public on this kind of thing, you obviously are going to kind of decide what your target audience is. Genuinely starting out, I kind of thought there would be a bit more industry audience and more kind of young bartenders and things. And while they're definitely there, there's also a lot of just home bartenders who are pretty kind of just really want to know the basics. So I've got a few screenshots of some comments that I've had here. So this person really likes using 7-Up or Sprite in their Tom Collins, which, might seem like sacrilege to some people, but if they really enjoy it, then that's great. It also means, though, that now they've watched that video, they know that it's kind of meant to be made with soda. And so if they go and have that at a bar or something, they're not going to be like, oh, it doesn't really taste like how I make it at home. Then I had this person saying that they can't find lime. Could they use lemon juice instead? And while they might have been looking for me to be like, well, technically, according to Dave Arnold's, some kind of experiment on the relative acidity of lime and lemon juice, I kind of think that they just wanted someone to be like, yeah, dude, it's fine, go ahead, use it, and it will still be delicious. So I like to think that, they would have then made a cocktail that they might not have because they didn't think that they had the correct ingredients. The syrup one was definitely interesting. We were doing a video on sort of syrups and shrubs and oleos. It was a little bit more advanced, I suppose. And while we had, the pot and the burner there, Josh, my partner, said we should do a simple syrup video. And I was like, but it's sugar and water. Like, surely everyone, should know that. And then it got, 11,000 views. And that's just my video on it, like across all the cocktail bar channels is like hundreds of thousands of views. So I think just that idea of us always kind of having to take a slight step back and realize that what we think of as a base level of knowledge is not necessarily the actual base level of knowledge of the people that are engaging. And then also, thinking about why the audience is here. And this last comment obviously really meant a lot to me because honestly, one of the reasons really that I started doing it was that when the opportunity came along, it's awesome because there's a lot more women and people of color and stuff doing it now. But definitely when I first got approached about it, it was basically just all white dudes doing YouTube channels about drinking. So this was on a whiskey video. And she said, I deeply appreciate that you're a woman talking about this because it gives me confidence to actually try some. So I really hope, in my head, she's now like a whiskey guru or like a distiller or something. And that was sort of the thing that made her engage with it. I think it's obviously, as I said, if when I'm writing for Australian bartenders, whatever, I don't really have to be as careful with the language and things, but definitely shooting videos and stuff like that, I quite often have to take even a step back from explaining it as simply as you kind of think that you can. I said everything I wanted to say there. So the next bit, I guess, is a bit more of a practical, how to use social media. Honestly, probably most people in this room are better at it than me. It's obviously a complete full-time job in terms of trying to keep up with algorithms and what various platforms want and what platforms are kind of on trend and things now. I always used to think that we kind of had to, be a little bit more trying to follow the trends and should I be dancing on TikTok and so on. But I do think that, and obviously some people that might totally be your personality and that's great, but I cannot dance. So I think it's important to remember to be authentic, to kind of do something that you can do time in and time out. I think especially sort of your Gen Z and stuff can smell if you're not, if you don't belong there. And it also actually makes you a stronger brand in terms of when other, opportunities for collaboration and partnership come up. If you might not have the biggest audience in the world, but if you have a strong audience who really do engage a lot with your content and stuff, then that actually puts you in kind of a pretty good position because, I guess to get a bit transactional about it, they are kind of more likely to actually click through and buy something that you recommend or whatever, rather than someone that maybe has millions and millions of followers, but there isn't that same kind of connection. I would also just say to be realistic. I'm not driving out of here in a Lamborghini, and that's not just because I'm on my second spritz. It's definitely, YouTube is not a get-rich-quick plan. We just about cover the cost of the channel through that. So, it's hard work, and especially if you do have another job outside of it, it's something to definitely consider how much time and energy you can dedicate to it. Which kind of leads to that second point there is definitely set schedules that you can stick to. Social media is always going to demand more content, more, it's always like, oh, if I just posted 3 times a week or 4 times a week, then maybe I would get there. And I did, try that and honestly burnt out a little bit trying to have that and a full-time job as well. Hannah, who's here, can attest to a few meltdowns along the way. So I think just being realistic about how much you're willing to give and are able to give is important. And at the end of the day, some people aren't going to like your content. I'm glad that I'm doing this now and not when I was in my early 20s or something, because definitely some of the comments are not that great. But I do kind of feel like I'm always happy that when there's some misogynistic stuff or whatever, that it kind of comes at me and I can take it and try and serve back a little bit and hopefully just make that person think about it a bit more the next time they're deciding to go and be a dick. Then faces and videos, you're definitely, like, you've all seen those YouTube thumbnails where you're like doing crazy faces and whatever, and you do actually, those just get a much better click through. And you just have to put your dignity to the side for a second. Same on Instagram. I'm sure most of you know this, but anything that has a person in it, or even just like a hand around the glass or something, rather than just the glass, as beautiful as it can be, always gets way more interaction. There's something kind of hardwired in our brains, I think, about seeing, a human element in a photo. And then honestly, this other point I'm not great at, but if you can embrace new technology, like Instagram's really pushing Reels at the moment to try and kind of stand up to TikTok, I suppose. So if you do a Reel, then you're way more likely to get served kind of to a wider audience than you are just static posts and so on. So there's obviously heaps and heaps of kind of more qualified people than me out there explaining how all of these things work, and I think it's definitely a good thing to try and keep ahead of if you can. But then bringing it right back to that sort of idea of connection and hospitality, like the main thing for me is I just always put aside 10 minutes a day to answer comments, because people have taken the time to engage with you, engage with what you've put out there. And even though sometimes some of them can seem, again, like pretty obvious or like not even really make sense in terms of bartending, I think it's good to just always, try and be kind and tell them, kind of impart what knowledge you can. Asking questions as well in your posts and in your videos, and trying to make people feel like you're actually sort of involved, letting the mask slip sometimes. When I first started out, I just had massive imposter syndrome and was really anxious about if I did something wrong, if I or just dropped an ice cube or whatever. I was like, oh, everyone's just going to think it's like some bimbo making the drinks that doesn't know, what she's doing. So I used to make them edit all of that out. But as I've kind of got more confident and settled into it a little bit, like, people love when I can't get a bottle open. That's like their favorite thing, which happens quite a lot. I don't get to go to the gym as much as I'd like. So, and then, obviously when you actually make content that people have asked for previously, even if you haven't got to it till like a few months down the line, they're always super excited when it's like, oh, so-and-so actually said that they wanted a deep dive on absinthe or whatever, and I finally got there. And it gives people a bit of a sense of ownership. And again, in that same way of when you welcome someone into your bar and they end up a bit of a regular and you remember their drinks order, it's, I think, that same feeling that people get. And that's kind of how to translate it onto the virtual world. So that's basically it for me. I do think that obviously social media has a lot of downsides, and I'm not trying to gloss over those at all. But it is really a great equalizer, that idea of being able to just spread our vision of good hospitality, good drinks. People aren't really necessarily going to appreciate a clarified Manhattan if they haven't just had a good Manhattan before. And making sure that, again, people that don't maybe have access to the kind of level of hospitality that we do all the time still get to be involved and feel a bit of an ownership over good food and good drinks, because for me that's like a fundamental human right. So let's use it as a force for good. Thanks.
We'll do I'm a bit yeah. Do we get the chairs? Do you want to sit down for this? And then I think the way we're going to do this, guys, is if you guys have a question, just raise your hand and then I can repeat it for the mic and the cameras. Does anyone have anyone to start, or should I kick off? I'll start with you.
No one's had enough spritzes.
Yeah, that's definitely a problem. It's really interesting, actually, because obviously you and I do something a little bit similar, apart from the fact that I'm on TikTok and I have to prop my camera in my kitchen. But what I wanted to ask you about was, I guess, if you've never built a personal brand before, why do you think that's important for someone who's just sort of bartending and figuring out where this industry could take them?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, like, we all love hospitality, but I think that just kind of day in, day out bartending, there's only so many people that can really do that for their entire career. I definitely never, I still plan on being behind the bar for like a good while. But I think just starting to kind of look up and look outside of that and again, see how you can sort of be a bit more involved in the wider industry rather than just sort of in your own bar is definitely kind of one thing. And also, I just think that like most of us got into this industry because you have great we have great personalities. But everyone's usually in because they like chatting to people, they like communication, they like making people's days, and so it does almost feel a shame to sort of keep that in just one little local community, as much as that's important. But now when everything is so global and worldwide, why not sort of put yourself out there as well?
Yeah, and does it help you find people for your like articles on Australian Bartender as well? If someone's maybe got a bit of a profile, they're being a bit vocal about something.
Absolutely. There's definitely, especially when you're looking at people in different cities and so on. And as you say, like the past few years have been so weird. And like I'm definitely just getting a bit older as well in terms of maybe not being out until 4:00 in the morning every night and bouncing around and having those late night sort of like bumping into people and meeting new people that we used to. So it does feel like a bit of socializing in general has moved online and especially when you see people who are clearly really smart and really engaged in the industry sharing stuff and sort of making a bit of a name for themselves, that's definitely kind of an easy way to be like, the next time I have to do a profile on someone or whatever, that's who will spring to mind.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess for bars as well, if someone's in charge of running their bar social media or they maybe just have like an impact on it, do you think there's like a limit of, I guess, for me, for example, I used to work at this bar in London called Satan's Whiskers, and they were really staunch against having a social media, and now they run a really good one. But they actually even share their recipes, and I always thought initially that would be something you shouldn't do because you still want someone to come to the bar, but it doesn't seem to be hindering their trade. So I guess is it like when you're running a bar social media, is there anything you shouldn't do or can't do? Or
I mean, I really honestly don't think so. Like, I think almost the main thing, again, in terms of just setting those schedules is consistency, because I do see it with a lot of bars and stuff where obviously we all know what hospital's like. You'll have 1 week where you actually have a fair bit of time on your hands and you can plan a few posts and things, and then you have a couple of weeks where you just get slammed and everyone's isolating because of COVID, and so then nothing gets put up for a while. And I think that kind of, inconsistency is not great for algorithms and things like that. Just trying to do, even if you can only commit to 1 a week or whatever, actually doing that 1 a week and making sure that you sort of stay in people's feeds and so on. But yeah, I mean, I think like obviously the whole thing with YouTube or TikTok or whatever, there was a slight feeling of like, oh, if we lift the veil, does that devalue what we do? But I really don't think so. I really think that especially when it comes to actual bars, when you actually do put the recipes up there that are quite like, and then you backpack this thing and then you sous vide it for blah, blah, or and they're like, oh, okay, no, I can't do that at home. And then even the more simple things, I do think that people kind of understand that like it never tastes as good as when they have it. I know for me, it's like I make myself drinks at home all the time, and I'm like, I just really wish I was at the Black Pearl having this instead. And it's because of the atmosphere and the service and everything else that we kind of curate around the drink. So I feel like it can almost help people see that mismatch of, you can make yourself a great drink at home, and that's nice. It might be your treat knockoff thing, but it still doesn't replace going out to those awesome venues and being properly served and hosted.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. Whenever I make a drink for social media, I always drink it after, and then I'm just like, I'm not anywhere I want to be. I'm just on my couch.
Yeah, exactly. It's not the same.
yeah, definitely. Does anyone have anything they want to ask, Cara? All good? Okay, no worries.
Sweet.
You might be off the hook.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go straight into our second speaker, who's come down from Sydney. So this is James Irvine. So he runs the bar at Four Pillars Lab in Surrey Hills. And speaking of all those drinks that we definitely can't make at home, this person definitely makes those. So we're going to deep dive now into some serious, really cool flavor stuff. I know, because he gives me recipes, and then I'm like, there's just nothing I can do at home here. Anyway, please come up and have a chat with us. Good?
I BYO'd. G'day. Hi, everyone. I'm over here. Bit of a short joke for you. This clicky thing, that's not me. That's all good. How you guys going? Yeah? Brought the weather with me. Rain joke. Here we go. Fantastic. So guys, my name's James Irvine. I have a long title and I work at Four Pillars. I'm the creative director of Gin Drinks. So I have an interesting role. I kind of, first and foremost, I'm going to talk a bit about myself, a day-to-day type thing, and then what we get into our work to each and every day at Four Pillars. So Four Pillars a distillery, Four Pillars a brand, and then what we've called the lab in Surrey Hills. We've aptly named it What's Your Flavour? I'm a massive Craig David fan myself, so some people too young for that. That's all right. I'm showing my age. How good. So, in a time before Four Pillars, I was a budding bartender. And I got to say, the first thing that I think really got me where I am in this industry is a lot of luck, quite literally and figuratively. Like I studied, so I didn't have any money, so I had to go to bars to drink, but I needed money to drink. So I decided to work in the bars to get the money to drink in the bars that I wanted to drink at. Complex. But I fell in love with it. I have no affinity to hospitality before this moment in my life. Some people have that really romantic story of, I was born on the floor of a restaurant, I was running plates before the age of 10. I didn't have that. Like I said, out of desperation for... There's some really interesting photos up here as well. I did it out of essential necessity, but I fell in love with it. And for me, the one thing I love the most, and if there's one thing I can talk about today, is flavour. We do have some people from Four Pillars here today, and they've probably seen me go blue in the face saying this, but for me, drinks, hospitality, and especially cocktails should be flavour first. So Jane did mention, we'll talk about some techniques a bit later on in the piece, but for me, if it doesn't have validity in using that technique or that piece of technology, then there's no point doing it unless it tastes, first and foremost, delicious. Does that make sense? Like you can go, hey man, I spent 2 weeks making this, and then the customer says, great, I'll just get a beer next time. It needs to have that validity. So for me, that's definitely been a philosophy that I've taken through my whole bartending career, all the way through to my first Four Pillars menu down the bottom here. I started off as a bartender in Sydney and cut my teeth with the Swool House Group. You may have heard of venues such as Shady Pine Saloon, the Baxter Inn, Restaurant Hubert, and if you've wound up in Sydney's late night life economy, and it does exist. I know I'm talking to Melburnians, and they're like, oh yeah, I was out till 9 a.m. at Revs. We go out till about 3, Frankie's Pizza. So for us, they're all different beverage offerings, right? Absolutely, and they all tick a purpose. So for us, deliver your product to your customers the way that it should be delivered. And for us, first and foremost, it's flavour-led. It's around this point in time somewhere, around the time we opened Hubert, I sat on a plane to New Orleans, Louisiana, and I shared the galley with my future boss. His name's Stuart Gregor, so if anyone has met him, quite the personality, but we were flying Delta, not hanging shit, but we were flying Delta, and it came to beverage service, and the drinks trolley came over and they said, gents, would you like a beer? And we both said yes. Like, we've just flown 16 hours to Dallas, another 2 hours-ish to New Orleans, and we decided we'd have a beer, but the boss man didn't have any cash. I knew who he was, he didn't know who I was, so I was like, I'll buy him a beer, see what happens. 18 months later, he offered me a job as their brand ambassador, to which I said no. But in between that period, and apologies for the hairstyle on this shot, guys, but in between that period, we made a bartender series, Four Pillars Gin, with, I'm pretty sure there's some disgusting frosted tips. So there's Stu, there's Sammy Ng. I definitely followed greatness into this role at Four Pillars and worked with a family and people that I've grown to grow with really, really closely and loved. But we made Underground Sydney Gin, which has to be Four Pillars' most successful release in history. Has anyone actually seen that bottle before? It didn't fly off shelves, but it's something we really enjoyed doing. That was actually my first time distilling gin, and something that really showed me the ropes on how you can make something that you think is delicious and flavoursome and awesome in a distilling perspective. So for those who have mates who own distilleries, or I'll talk a bit later about toys, but Creating flavour, for me, there are a few techniques that are primary, but just distillation is second to none. It literally is the building of flavours. That's the Shady Pines Fox on the label for anyone that is interested. Which brings us to my first encounter with Four Pillars Gin. Four Pillars shared that same passion. So when I met with Cameron, he literally ran me through the ins and outs of distilling botanicals, obviously, first and foremost, but then the art of distilling, batch recipe, after batch recipe after batch recipe, trial and error. Something we're very proud of at Four Pillars is talking about experimentation. And I know there's some amazing bartenders in the room, and I think you can all agree experimentation might not always be a great result. At Four Pillars, we always talk about that asparagus gin, which never got released, obviously. It was pretty shit house. But for us, and please don't tell my bosses I said this because I'm coming to you from a bartending perspective. I'm going to get in trouble for saying this. Gin is just an ingredient. They pay my bills, and I'm saying that. But gin is just an ingredient for us as bartenders, especially with the array of Australian gins on the market at the moment. It is an awesome, booming industry. It's something I'm super proud of as someone who's been a part of that industry to see grow. And I think, first and foremost, if you are going to drink a gin, make sure it's Australian. Obviously, if it's Four Pillars, thank you. But please drink Australian, support this industry because it is growing and it is only going from strength to strength. But something I definitely took away from that experience with Cameron the first time I was at the distillery was the way that we inherently use gin as a base spirit. And something that we pride ourselves on at Four Pillars is bringing people together. So the celebration of a cocktail can be the celebration of a drink, an occasion. For me, my favourite is aperitivo drinking. The one thing the Italians got incredibly right is eating and drinking before you go out to eat and drink, right? Like, just a no-brainer. How good is that? But you can celebrate that sense of occasion. You can evoke a sense of great classic gin drinks, which we'll talk about in a sec as well. But it really does, for me, it brings people together. That's what I love about cocktails. And in particular, one thing we do at Four Pillars is we celebrate craft gin so well. And that's the versatility of the range that we do. So we have everything in between our juggernaut rare dry gin and then, what I call bartender's ketchup, bloody Shiraz gin. You just add a bit to that to anything and it'll just make drinks pop. Does that make sense? Yeah, awesome. I did mention kind of the way that Four Pillars approaches drinking. That's our distillery in the top right-hand corner, also your left, which is just going through a massive facelift at the moment. One of the biggest in Australian spirits currently to date. Something we're super proud of. But for us, that's to celebrate the art of drinking and great gin drinks. So that will celebrate cutting-edge cocktails through to the humble gin and tonic. For those who haven't been to the distillery, we go through about 600 of those paddles a weekend. So for us, it's, to Kara's point, it's knowing what your customers want and making sure that you deliver that at the correct level consistently. 600 times a weekend's a lot. I don't think I take 600 breaths a weekend, but we definitely do pump it out. And then in the middle column there, there's some dickhead making a martini, but that's our lab in Surrey Hills, which I'll talk to you about later. But for us, that's our first satellite site, purely there to celebrate gin cocktails. And it's kind of hard, especially as a Sydney cider, which is the vodka soda capital of the world, to smack up a gin bar in the middle of Surrey Hills and only serve gin drinks. A couple of beers and wines on the side, but that's usually for staff consumption. But this is where we get to really play with our drinks. So that's our R&D bar that you see there below the four balls, so to speak. And that's where we have a play each and every day. I'm not too sure what the guys are doing today. They're probably just having a day off. But for us, that's definitely where we do play with all of our signature serves, new releases. So Four Pillars prides itself on releasing at least a new gin a year. And for us, it's celebrating great drinks around that as well, which is that storytelling, that sense of occasion, which is something I think is the really easy way to complement gin. To use the Nutrigrain analogy, gin is a lot like Nutrigrain, right? You only get out what you put in. So those botanicals that you're using, if they don't shine, you're not going to have that backbone to that drink. You're not going to have validity in the drinks you want to make. Does that make sense? Or am I dribbling? You get what I mean? Fantastic. And then, I'm not sure if anyone read The Age today, but this is our brand new bar in Hillsville. So this is something we're super excited about. Launching in, we're going to say April, because that's what the article said. It was meant to open in 2020, but so was everything else, right? But for us, we're super pumped about it. So that expansion upon the distillery will definitely back up that philosophy of our gin and our gin drinks. So we love visitors as well. Please come to the distillery. Drop my name. They might charge you double, but please come say good day. And we'd love to have you there. Now to get into the thick of it, classic drinks. Classics are classics for reasons, right? They've stood the test of time. To Jane's point, some are great, some are good, and some are average. But for us, we use them as great building blocks. I think for any young budding bartenders in the room, using a database of classics is a great way to develop skill sets, palettes, understanding of technique, how drinks have changed over time. And for me, it's all about booze history. So I think great classics are the great flavour secrets behind great bars. Like using the Nutrigrain analogy again, for us, it's all about the fancy botanicals we use, right? You can easily hero a botanical in a drink. So finger limes in a gimlet, delicious, right? Lime on lime, real double lime action there. What we like to do is to challenge that. So you can take the scaffold of the way something that's as bright and fragrant and as fresh as citrus, and then challenge it, make it work hard to really pop. Someone did say salted caramel vodka earlier, and I'm probably going to put that in the top pocket for later. That sounds delicious, right? But that contrasting in flavours can really, really make or break a well-balanced drink. So for us, it is that balancing act, but it's also making ingredients shine. And this is something that we replicate in our homes, in our signature serves, events, pretty much anything that has 4 Pillars drinks involved in it is something that we try to adapt, evolve, and make and sometimes even make heroes from it. I'm not sure if anyone did try Changing Seasons gin, but that's probably one of my favourite ones there up here, which was a collaborative gin that we did. Beautiful perfumes, Japanese oaks throughout it, which we did everything between fresh yuzu and then through to Japanese kombu or wakame. Something that I'm very passionate about in Australia are our food sources. I'm sure you've heard Australia is a production island. We have access to over 6,000 native ingredients on this rock that you can't find anywhere else in the world, whether it be fresh citrus, herbs, spices, even indigenous fruits. And then I put a mango there, because who doesn't like mango, right? One thing that I always find working for a gin distillery and making drinks is when you talk to guests from around the world, and I know that seems like a novelty, especially after the last few years we've had, but when you do and you say, oh yeah, we get fresh citrus all year round, or our mango season goes for 6 months, people are like flabbergasted. So something I definitely take pride in as someone who works with flavour is the fact that we can access certain ingredients that you can't find anywhere else in the world, but then the quality of it as well. We're incredibly lucky to have access to this, and that's blooming wattle. So this is all shot in, except for the mango, shot in the Yarra Valley at Sparrow Foraging. It's a beautiful foraging course in Victoria. Not sure if anyone's been, but Liam's an absolute wizard. Yeah, I definitely feel the mango had presence there. All right, I'm going to talk to you about my day-to-day. So in 2018, when I took that role with 4 Pillars, the guys offered me a brand ambassador role, which I said I declined. So just a little bit about me. I was like, yeah, cool. I always wanted to open a drinks facility that you could use to help educate budding young bartenders like myself, and using toys. So we're going to talk a bit about toys now. We're going to talk a bit about technique. We're going to talk a bit about the lab. So first and foremost, the reason why we call it the 4 Pillars Lab is the fact that we wanted to really back up the statement that we hope to pioneer drink making techniques, and that's through everything we've kind of touched on so far. But then at the same time, when we opened it, I was like to the bosses, like, yeah, cool, another invoice for more toys, another invoice for more toys. Hey, by the way, we need to keep upkeep on this, this, and this, and this. And my boss Stu, who can be a bit brash sometimes, is like, mate, why is this costing so much? And I said, you did call the place the 4 Pillars Lab. If you didn't, it'd be like going to a zoo without any animals. And this is before we even opened. So we were those people that built a bar during the COVID pandemic. opened on the 8th of June 2020. Could only have 30 people in it at each time. And I got to say, if I had my time again, I'd do the exact same thing again. It was a phenomenal experience. I don't think I've ever personally been tested on what we could only do 90 covers a night for starters, but we were selling out every night. I think everyone in Sydney was just a bit thirsty by this point. And I laugh talking about it, but we're talking 90 people per night drinking up to 500 drinks. So they came, they saw, they conquered. But that philosophy's never changed. So it's never changed from executing a well-balanced south side through to whatever's on the menu at the lab at the moment. So before we go through the advanced techniques, I don't think I can stress enough that a well-made south side, a well-delivered gin and tonic will always beat, I think what Cara said was the clarified Manhattan, for example. For me, if you can back it up with perfectly made simple drinks, then simple drinks reign supreme. Some of my heroes still post on Instagram techniques. Luke down at Birdie was like, I'm doing a brandy infusion and it's fruit and brandy, that is it. No tech, no nothing. So I do think that there are reasons why we have classic techniques that have stood the test of time, because they're valid, they have purpose and they have reason. So for me, always back up with validity. What I said from the start, if you can always back up why you're doing things and how you're going to get there, and then the execution is amazing, then awesome. And that's, without sounding too much of a dickhead, that is world-class drinking. That is why we want these experiences. That is that elevated experience. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool, awesome. All right, let's talk toys. And this is creative direction. So this is something that I do on a day-to-day with. Actually, to be honest, it's the lab team. They do all the hard work. I come in and make a mess and leave. But the guys are phenomenal. We promote creativity. We keep innovation at the heart and core of this venue and its menu. So for us, it's venue first, then the menu. Seasonality, working with producers, and technique probably last, all falls under that. But for us, again, we are a gin brand. We have a story to tell. I've got product to move as well, I'm not going to lie to you. So the menu at the lab at the moment is broken down into carbonated cocktails, kind of more your experimental serves. And then I'm sure hospitality professionals in the room right now can say that the takeaway option has probably been a primary focus for the better part of 18 months to 2 years. I think that's fair to say. So for us, a bit like 50 Cent, or I'll say Disney, we have people exit through the gin shop instead of exit through the gift shop, right? For us, bottled cocktails have taken off. I might start there. There's a bottle called Tan Lines. It's kind of funny. The most sun-deprived bartender in the world came up with a drink called Tan Lines, but that was a drink that we did for a skincare company called Bondi Sands. And it was actually an event in Los Angeles called G'day USA, which is a bit like Australia on a plate, if that makes sense. And they said, what are you going to do? And we sat down, we thought about it. And this was the first event I did for Four Pillars over 4 years ago now. We said, why don't we do a drink that tastes the way sunscreen smells? I know Darren's a massive Seinfeld fan, so it's like going to the beach, right? But it needed to be shelf stable for the journey because, of course, we had to take it over with us. So we had to think of ways that we could do it. Turned out being a vegan milk punch recipe that is something that's actually stood the test of time. And to this day, we do about 70 litres of that a week just for the gin shop alone. So a tiny little high street shop in Surrey Hills, Sydney. And it doesn't matter if it's the middle of winter or the peak of summer, people are drinking fresh and vibrant drinks. Which is something I love because that's from my first experience in Four Pillars, essentially pina colada in a bottle. And then to that, the bottled cocktail stuff's awesome. What we're working on the menu at the moment is something I'm super excited about, and that's partnering with people. So I did mention producers. If you're like me and you have a bit of a sweet tooth, this is Gelato Messina. So they obviously they're huge in the gelato industry around Australia now. I think they're about to open an offsite in Perth, but we've looked at using their byproducts for many drinks for a long time. And the one thing that they use a lot of is waffle cone. We use a byproduct for a drink called Coneception, which is repurposed waffle cone. I'm pretty sure I've stolen this from Orlando and Darren, but infusing their offcuts of milk and curdling it as well. So Definitely a smarter way to look at waste, but also things that, again, is delicious and it makes sense. And these are things that I think I can definitely see our industry moving towards a lot more. And I don't think that creativity is something where you sit in an empty room and you're just given time to think. Usually it's when you're given restrictions. So the things that you don't have access to usually engage your thought process to think more about what you're going to do, how you're going to do it. And for us, that's how we came up with the conception. I'm going to talk about two more things and then I'll probably open up to questions if that's okay. But for me, the one thing I love to do, especially in the lab, is carbonated drinks. So carbonated drinks, how good was that spritz on arrival, by the way? I haven't shut up about it, it's delicious. So the homegrown mango and ginger spritz slaps, absolutely delicious. We've kind of adapted that, and a lot of bars around Australia. I'm not saying this is just us, because I take inspiration from a lot of people, and I'm definitely not saying that. But for us, we look at what people are doing, we try to adapt it. So the juice industry, for example, so that top left corner there, that's mango puree that we've turned into a mango soda in the lab, carbonating it to water. We've kegged it for events. Geez, we did something for Mecca Cosmetica, and we did a mango highball. It wasn't as good as the spritz, but it was pretty tasty nonetheless. But for us, that's that backing up the technique component. So the reason why we're doing that is obviously for shelf stability. It's also for the technique that we're applying to it. So being able to carbonate liquid like mango nectar, it needs to go through clarification. Sorry, Cara, I'm sorry I said the C word, but we needed to clarify that. But that's what I've been trying to explain, is the fact that you need to back that preparation up with validity. So if you can make sure that you give a reason why you're doing it, I think that's totally above board. And then at great length, I'd like to talk to you about trial and error, and probably my favourite piece of kit in the lab, and it's probably the one piece of kit that a lot of people think of when they think of advanced bar technology and equipment, and it's called a rotary evaporator, which is this scientific apparatus up top. So for those who don't understand, essentially the technique is called cold distillation. For those who don't know, alcohol evaporates at just under 80 degrees Celsius. It's 78.3 if you want to be exact. What this piece of apparatus does is it allows you to reduce the boiling point of alcohol to a controlled temperature through the use of vacuum pressure. I know, it sounds pretty advanced, but essentially you want to make sure everything's nice and sealed. You want to make sure that everything's tight, because you don't want gas or vapor escaping, right? You don't. You can smell it before you see it happen, but you don't. And what that allows us to do is concentrate flavours. So that's my morning spin class, I call it. So it's when I come in early and do a distillation. I don't put it on Strava because you don't get the kilometres for it, but we use this for shelf stability, but also for things like intensified flavour profile. For me, I think simple infusions and distilling are some of the best ways to get impact of flavour, but then also shelf life. So that's where you'll see a massive difference. You can put a whole bunch of mango in a bottle of gin and it will be delicious. However, things will happen to it over time. Things will break down. Alcohol, I love alcohol. I probably should have mentioned that from the start, but alcohol can actually eat away at natural colouring and flavouring over time. Has anyone done that before, made an experiment at home? Even, a bottle of whiskey, for example, cherry brandy, anything like that, it will eat away colour it over time. One of my favourite fails ever was trying to add freeze-dried Davidson plum powder to a bottle of gin, just as an experiment. And it stripped it of its colour. It came out looking beautiful, pink, vibrant. I was like, that looks sick. We're going to sell heaps of it. And by the end of it, it turned like an opaque grey. And I was like, oh, shit, that's not what I wanted. Let's trial and error. And for me, that's what I love about what I do. And that's what I love about flavour contrast as well. So when I say contrasting flavours, for us, we look at that as not necessarily a creative muse, so to speak, but a challenge. And something I definitely did a lot during lockdown was we called it the cool room clear out. So we got a little cool room at the lab, tiny, 2x4 metre space, but it was jam-packed the week we went into lockdown. And the boss was like, okay, we're going to do bottled cocktails again. So I was like, okay, here we go. The memes came out, Sydney goes back into lockdown. It's just going to be 1 week, blah, blah, blah. Gladys isn't around anymore, but, what's going to happen here? So we looked at our cool room and we turned ingredients that were in cold storage into bottled drinks that are now on our menu. That's how much we like them. So for us, it was advantageous because all of our suppliers had shut shop as well. So I was like, oh, geez, what are we going to do? So for us, it was a creative, what we called a creative challenge. So for us, rotary evaporation, you'll see amazing bars around the world execute this really well. You'll see amazing bars around the world not execute this because they don't need to. For us, I guess the experience for us is if the drink that you're drinking is something that you like drinking, you've done something right, yeah? I did write some notes when Cara was talking that I couldn't agree with more. The first one is never diss a French martini. That drink has gotten me out of a hot spot a few times behind bars like the Baxter Inn, for example. But these are drinks that people recognise. Something that I'd like to share with you that we do in the lab is we take drinks like that and we turn them into our own version. So we have a grasshopper using Australian green ants that we call the green ant grasshopper. Bit of a play on word there, bit of fun, but also it's a drink that people can recognise immediately. My mum, Sue Irvine, loves a grasshopper. I think she's been renowned for pounding them into the earth's core. But definitely when I put that up to her, she's like, oh, it tastes like a grasshopper. I was like, go Sue. And then Cara, you made a really good point of that we live in a gourmet bubble. And I don't think that could be truer in a city such as Melbourne. I think I've had the best meals and the best drinks of my life in this town. Phenomenal food and drink culture. And I think you guys are privileged to go to any bar around the corner within a 5K radius of where we are right now and have an outstanding drink and some pretty good nosh as well. So I thought that was a really good point. What else have we got? I'm not sure if you guys know, I'm the late call-up. Matt Jones, who actually does all the work at Four Pillars, is that it? Matt Jones was going to be the Four Pillars keynote, but they sent me instead, so sorry. Thank you, mate. I think that is the end of it. But the one thing I wanted to finish on is how exciting the Australian cocktail industry is. So as late as last year, we had 4 bars named in the world's top 100, all of them which you'd be guaranteed for a bloody good time, whether it be food, drink, ambience. We, as like a bar culture, we just get it. You know, you sometimes you go to bars and you sit down and you feel like you're in a library. You can't use your phone to read the menu. You can't talk too loudly because you're going to offend someone. I don't know if anyone's been on the lash with me before. I tend to enjoy myself, and I'm the guy who puts his elbows out when he sits down. Sorry. But it's that engagement, it's that enjoyment that we get from our hospitality industry that I think is what's seeing us thrive, especially in cocktail cultures. Whether it be across the bar, in a restaurant, Orlando's bottled cocktails takeaway, for example, all of them are executed incredibly well, but they have validity, they're creative, they're innovative, and for me, they tell a story and bring people together. And that's what I think what great drinks do, and I think that's the power of flavour. Yeah, cheers.
Can I just also say on the French martini, it's actually the most popular cocktail on Difford's Guide, which is in Australia. So that is Australians Googling French martini and then clicking on us, and we're the only country where it's number 1. So it's not going away. Cool. Does anyone want to kick off, or do you guys want me to do it? Easy. Cool.
Great chat. Well done to Cara as well. Really, really good. I'm just curious, when a brand comes to you and wants to do a collaboration, how do you come up with the idea of what that collaboration is going to be, or what that drink's essentially going to be? How long does that usually take to come to an end point?
I think that's a really good question. The one thing that I shouldn't say this because my boss is sitting right here, but I get given deadlines all the time, and sometimes, to Cara's point, they are realistic, and then with the greatest respects, sometimes they're not. I don't think there's a time limit on the creative process in regards to creating new drinks. Without sounding too poetic, sometimes you just go, it's a no-brainer. Sometimes it's the simplest thing ever. You go, I've got 3 different, for us, we're a gin brand through and through, right? So we have gins that tell a great story. For us, we do let botanicals do the storytelling for us as well. And then from there, you have the flavour wheel that you can rely on. I probably should have mentioned, I have been doing this for nearly 15 years. So sometimes there are some copy and paste jobs. Sometimes it's a visit to Difford's Guide. But realistically, everything I spoke about there is true. You can lean on great classics. I still think classics are awesome building blocks for creating new drinks as well. So new content can come from the old. But yeah, 2 weeks deadline, 1 week. For me, it's just a number. You're banging out. The amount of drinks that we try that don't make the final cut, embarrassingly high. And I love our team because it's pretty cutthroat. Even our owners are like, mate, what were you thinking? I mentioned the asparagus gin because that wasn't me, but there's probably been another 250 of those that have been cocktails that the bosses have said, nah, mate, you've missed this by a mile. Very vague answer. I'm sorry, Sean.
Do you have anything to do when you're, I guess, like the idea isn't coming? I guess a bit like writer's block.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes I think the hospitality industry is really awesome that you can bounce ideas off people. Whereas a writer, for example, might be like, I don't want to give you all my good ideas. But I think, and that's what I love about Australia, we're very collaborative. Like we like to work off each other, whether it be in drink design or working closely with chefs. Something I didn't mention is, you don't get this soft not enjoying the finer things in life. I look to the chefing industry and I go, wow, there's so many pioneering, innovative, engaging ideas that people are working with in the kitchen world that you can adapt to the drinks world so easily. And the one thing I love about Australian gin in particular, so obviously gin, but Australian gin, is that we're using ingredients that a lot of people around the world just go, what is that? A funny 4 pillars story is we use a lot of gums, so eucalyptus, koala food, but trying to get that into the US is kind of hilarious because they think it's Hubba Bubba. I think it's chewing gum, right? So for us, I think we're very lucky and fortunate. So the writer's block, that does happen all the time, but for me, I think we've got a pretty stable industry to rely on to go, hey, I'm working on this, what do you think? And I've done that with people in this room, actually, so yeah.
Does anyone else have a question?
What do you think the best method is for challenging people's natural hesitancy to really innovative and complex cocktails?
That's a great question, and I deal with that on a day-to-day. I don't want to get in trouble, but the cheekiest way to do it is, look, if you don't like it, I'll buy it for you. But obviously, you're not going to do that every single time. For me, it's if you have a guest on the other side of the bar, this is a bar or a restaurant, you're serving someone, you build that trust with them. So I think if it is a session of a couple of sound recommendations and they go, oh, look, you've liked this, but maybe we can change. For me, I think that's more about the way you talk to your customers and your guests in the venue. I think the easiest way as well is give people a little taste as well. So if you can deliver that drink in a smaller portion and divvy it up amongst other people to try as well, that's always a good way to kind of execute it. And I guarantee the drinks that you're putting up that are slightly challenging are awesome and innovative and creative. And that's something I love, is when you blow someone's mind. So we did a drink 2 weeks ago in the lab because a chef mate posted something where she worked off the scent molecules of passion fruit and parmesan. I don't know how she got there, but she did. It was awesome. And we're like, oh, cool. So we looked at it and we went through all the cheesy puns and all that type of stuff. But by the time we finished working out the savoury component of incredibly bougie parmesan cheese and then right tropical passion fruit, it worked. But putting that on the menu, people were hesitant. We soon sold out because we're just like, have a little bit, just try a little bit. A lot of people, when they go to bars, are like kids trying food for the first time. They're going to make a mess, but they're probably not going to love everything from the get-go. But I think keep trialing. And if also at the end of the day, if it's a drink you like and you think has that validity and it has that structure and purpose, and you go, wow, that's a fucking banger, I'm going to drink that, then that's awesome. And then something I didn't talk about, you're not going to please everyone every time. I think we know that. There's nearly 8 billion of us on this rock. You're not going to please everyone every single drink. unless you're Orlando or Darren. But yeah, and keep doing it. Keep trialing there, friend.
Any other questions?
I'm actually more in the coffee world than the cocktail world, but I'm fascinated by what brand ambassadors do in the booze world.
Mate, I've been wondering that my whole life as well. Look, I think a lot of people look at the brand ambassador role as you rock up and you buy people drinks, and then you get on a plane and you go to all these awesome places and you shake hands and you kiss babies and you're the bee's knees. You know, a lot of people think that. Do you guys think that? Yeah, of course not. You're smart. No, I think the brand ambassador role is definitely one that has changed, especially in the last, we'll call it even before COVID, last 4 or 5 years. There is a lot more accountability behind that role, and I can reflect, like I said, I've got KPIs to meet as a creative director as well. So I've got to make sure that the awesome drinks that we're putting up, or that that sounded so obnoxious, but the drinks that we really want to put up are selling in the bar. So it still is a business at the end of the day. So as a brand, we look at everyone as a brand ambassador, whether you are a barback, a bartender, Stu, Cam, Matt, you are all ambassadors, names, faces to the business. And for us, you've got to, it's like making drinks. You've got to have validity behind it. So that BA role has accountability to it, absolutely. And I think if you asked any spirits brand around the world, they would also say that, especially after the last 2 years and before that as well. But I think you know, I definitely miss the days of when you'd have someone in town because they were flown in by an awesome brand to do a bar pop up. So I hope we start seeing more of those return. But I can definitely understand that they require a bit more structure. Yeah.
I have one last question for you, which is just, if you are someone who isn't working around a lab environment, how do you get like a little bit creative at home? Maybe say you just work in a classic cocktail bar, or maybe you're like me and just make drinks at home on TikTok. How do I get to try and do things that might be a little bit more challenging than just shaking fruit in a shaker?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great question because everything has a bottom line. Read up, knowledge is power. So a lot of the techniques that we apply to our menu and our venue in Surrey Hills have been done for hundreds of years. Knowledge is power. So if you look up the original milk punch recipe that dates back to the days of Benjamin Franklin, I don't think that bloke had a centrifuge. I'm just going to go out on a whim and say that. But I definitely think that reading up, knowledge is power. There are great books from modern bartenders that scale the technical advancements of drinks. So you have Matt Wiley, you have Rich Wood, you have Dave Arnold. These are probably the 3 pioneers of modern bartending, or future classics, or future drinking, if you want to call it that. I do think our doorstep has amazing bartenders as well. Luke Whitey from Birdie, Evan Stroh from Ree in Sydney, Dean Buchanan in Perth. So Australia's putting up pedigree bartender after pedigree bartender. Orlando as well. I nearly didn't mention the big dog in the house, but for us, I think if you want to learn more, ask more questions. There is nothing wrong, and we have a very young team in the lab, and we hand them the keys to some pretty expensive pieces of kit, the toys we call them. But we go, ask questions. You know, if you don't trust your judgment, ask again. It's totally fine. There's nothing wrong in getting it wrong. That's fine, but just make sure that you communicate that, you discuss that. If anyone is interested, to answer your question as well, in learning more, I've got my cards here. We have a full transparency on drinks, on tech. If you're ever in Sydney, there's time allocated for that as well. That's the whole point of having a lab. So it is open to people, like-minded people that want to give it a go, and obviously try some drinks whilst doing it. But yeah, definitely read up, engage with the community, go to your favourite bars, enjoy yourself responsibly, of course. But yeah, I still think that's the best way to do it. Is that I'm a tangible learner, so I need to burn myself twice before I learn something, and I need to break a rotovat once to learn not to do it again, right? So that happened. I can tell you guys that. It's safe space.
No, I'm the same. I actually just tried for the first time a recipe from Nick, actually, over in the corner. and I had to put something in a Ziploc bag for 3 days, and then I had to clarify it, and I didn't know how long that takes. So I had about like 20 cups with coffee filters all over my kitchen.
That's the coffee industry, Tim. A lot of coffee goes into making booze, mate, that's for sure. And then the filters are pretty handy as well.
Yeah, they take a long time though.
But yeah, I think just like I said, try things. If you mess it up, you mess it up. And then you've got a funny story to tell in front of a room of people that you never thought would happen. So go you guys. Thanks for your time, guys. I really appreciate it.
Hello, everyone. Howdy. Now, I can hear everyone, but not spectacularly well, and I can see some of you, but not a large number. So obviously, all of the gifts that COVID brings haven't quite finished, and I'm enjoying presenting to you from home as I do just a little bit of quarantine for the next few days, unfortunately, but we have sent some spirit over, and I will explain what that is in a little while. It is part of an experimental trial as opposed to a sort of finished product, but I'll get into that a little bit more. But the purpose of today is to share as much as we can about what we're doing at the farm. And the reason for that is that agave do take a while to grow, and until they're fully mature and ready to go, then what we're mostly doing is farming. But we're bringing a tremendous, I guess, a little bit more of a modern view of agronomy to sort of the noble plant of agave. So where it all begins, obviously it all starts in Mexico. This is a plant that has been cultivated, for thousands of years in various different ways, and it has a really incredibly deep ties into Mexican culture, and especially the sort of pre-colonial culture in Mexico. And it's, if you look at the ecology of Mexico, there's almost no naturally occurring free sugars. So there's a little bit of honey. You get a few fruits that have sugar that's accessible, things like prickly pear. You still have to fight the thorns for it, but the majority of the sugars in the ecology in that part of the world are really, really hard to get at. And the agave in its many, many forms, and obviously what we're looking at here is agave ticlana, what used to be more commonly known as Weber Azul or blue agave, and we're slowly moving to agave tequilana as we move away from a European naming, which is nice. But this plant stores sugar as inulin or a branched fructan. So these are really, really stable, hard to break down sugars that don't help you or I if we eat them. So inulin's a dietary fiber, so it's not a sugar. It's not going to give us energy, but it will keep us regular. And as such, sometimes agave are harvested for their inulin. But when it comes to eating agave, fermenting agave, distilling agave, we're really looking at the sugars. So I'll get into that a little bit later on. Next step is how it got to Australia. So it was about 15 years ago, quite a few different people were exploring biomass as a fuel source. They were exploring other forms of sugar production. So part of that has to do with the Great Barrier Reef and the seasonality of sugarcane. So sugarcane growing, the primary mode of looking after your sugarcane is what's called flood irrigation. So you plant them out, you flood the fields, wait for it to dry out, they grow great, you harvest them and you've got sugarcane. The problem with that is you get massive amounts of runoff. And as soil is also treated and there's various types of sort of commercial nutrients and things, that all runs off into the barrier reef, into the coral sea, and we get this sort of profound changes to the reef ecology, which we know is doing huge amounts of damage. So a lot of the sugar producers explored whether or not agave, which doesn't use that type of irrigation and doesn't need the sort of nutrient levels that sugarcane does. And the other thing is it has the potential to be harvested all year round. So most of the sugar refineries up in the north of Queensland, so our Eden Lassie farm is about 40 minutes north of Everleigh Beach. So if you drive for 2.5 days and get to Brisbane, you've only got another whole day of driving ahead of you to go again. And so I think we're as far north from Brisbane as Brisbane is north of Sydney before you get to Everleigh Beach and the farm. But we are in sugar cane growing area, and most of the sugar refineries really only operate for 3 months of the year. So the idea was that maybe we can be, harvesting sugar cane during the season and then potentially harvesting agave. Now, agave has really different challenges to sugarcane, namely, harvesting and thorns and the fact that the sap will, burn your skin and all sorts of wonderful things like that. And these projects didn't go forward. So back in 2019, we heard about a trial crop that was going to be bulldozed effectively, and there was a research lease that was running out. And when basically the day after the lease ran out, the energy, the sugar refinery company had sort of said, "Yep, we're bulldozing it. So if you want to do anything, you better do it quick." So we went up there and we did a harvest, and we harvested some piña, but we also harvested bulbils. So these were 10-year-old plants, a lot of which had reproduced and grown that flower spike. So that was really where the seeding crop came from for this farm. Now, we harvested them before we had the farm. So we took a bit of a leap of faith, and we then went about so we had about 100,000 bulbils, which are the little sort of similar to a seedling that grows on the flower spike, and we had nowhere to plant them. So the next thing was to find a farm. So we found the Eden Lassie farm. We put together a bit of a lease while we also had to raise some money to buy it, and we started planting. So let me see if I can move through this. There we go. So there's the little ones in the nursery. So this is a nursery that we actually have at Bowen, which is about 20 minutes north of the farm. So they are a mixture of bulbils, which are when they flower, but also tissue culture. So you can take a sort of a 1-year-old agave, and you can actually essentially cut the roots, treat it in water with nutrient, and it'll start to form new roots. And then if you cut each of those up, every single individual one of those roots will become a whole new plant. So you can tissue culture out. We don't need to do a lot of that, but we did a little bit of that at the start to sort of get things moving, and also obviously pups, which is what we're now pretty self-sufficient for that. And these can be planted out quite quickly. It's one of the things that we've discovered, Australia versus Mexico. In Mexico, there's a lot of traditions that have to do primarily with rainfall and climate. So Mexico being one, very dry, but also a sort of semi-monsoonal. So they have sort of 3 months which are quite wet, and then 9 months that are very dry. So by law, you can only plant new agave in the sort of time leading up to the wet. So in the couple of months before the wet season, and then you're not allowed to plant for the rest of the year. So we don't have that challenge. So we're able to do a few things a little more quickly, because we've certainly found the faster you get these in the ground, the faster they really start growing. So this is the farm by field. So we're 400 hectares, so about 1,000 acres. These are all the sort of different colours. I've put the farm by field over some of the fields there. My apologies with that. The sort of aqua light blue areas have already been planted out. The dark green areas are being planted, at the moment. And actually the ones in the middle near that sort of roadway, they've actually made a really good start on that. We call them the Greta Flats. And then the dark blue scheduled for next year. They're a bit more work. We've got to do some leveling in the fields and stuff like that. But then the yellow area, which you can see is actually where we'll be placing some solar power production. So that's the other side of the Bruce Highway. And so there's no, it's just really not practical to drive a tractor over the Bruce Highway to harvest anything. So that area there will be, reserved for energy sort of growth. So we're at 450,000 plants in the ground, and we're slowly working our way out to about 1 million plants. And we don't know whether that'll be a 4-year or a 5-year or even maybe a little bit longer sort of cycle. But we know that if we can, get that many in the ground, we should have a product that is exportable in the agave world. I want to tell you about Chris Mansour. So he came on board quite early on when we were looking for the farm. So he's a research agronomist. His business has been based in Bowen for many, many years. So Bowen and that region of Queensland is in a microclimate called the Queensland Dry Tropics. So for those who want to, get into the nerdy elements of microclimate, it gets way less rainfall. So it's in a rain shadow caused by the shape of the coastline. And that rain shadow extends from about 3 kilometres before our farm to just north of Townsville. And you still have access of water moving through. So you can see the hills behind Chris. Those hills get a lot of rain and we get very little. But the watershed drains from those hills past our farm into the Coral Sea. So we have access to water, but it doesn't fall as rain. So it gives us a lot of options in what we do. It also really closely matches the climate in Jalisco, in Mexico. So when you track temperature and rainfall, they're, almost line for line, which is, one of the reasons that we chose this location. So we're approximately 20 degrees south of the equator, and the town of Tequila is 20 degrees north of the equator. So we're the sort of opposite side of the equator, opposite side of the globe, sort of mirror image of Jalisco and the Tequila region in Mexico. And so fingers crossed, we're going to get some delicious agave. I'm sure people are thinking, but wait a minute, isn't agave got some altitude as part of it? And absolutely. And this part of that Queensland Dry Tropics, what we're finding when we looked at the weather data is that the maritime effect of being, we're pretty much on the coast of the Coral Sea. The Coral Sea is, I think, 3 kilometres from our farm is the coast. And so the maritime effect of being a coastal agave is sort of replicating, but, obviously with maritime rather than altitude, the same microclimate that we see in Mexico. So, well, that's the theory anyway. We'll see once we're able to harvest. So today I want to share with you a lot about what we're doing with our agronomy. So everything that we're doing from a position of how do we grow agave in Australia. We know that it's possible to grow them. We've seen them, get to 10 years old. But how do we do it? How do we do it well? How do we do it better? What have they done in Mexico because it's awesome for the plants? And what have they done in Mexico because of tradition? And it's really trying to unpick those and see what it is. So you can see our drone there, and that drone has a multi-spectrum camera. So, it takes a whole bunch of different photos using infrared and different color spectrums. And then that outputs this. I don't know how well you can see it, but this is one of our fields that we do multiple passes. So every quarter we run the drone over it, and the drone is it's connected to the sort of it's geotagged, so it has the latitude and longitude of every single plant in the field, and it runs over the top, and it does what they call a 3D point cloud, and that tells us the biomass of that plant. So any of the dots that are in red, they're not tracking very well at all. Any of the dots that are in yellow or are as big or bigger for age and what you would see traditionally in Mexico, and anything that's in that sort of bluish color is overperforming and is larger than what you would see in Mexico. Now these, you can sort of see that they're grouped in rows and lines. So right through that field, this is one of our main research fields. almost each row has multiple different ways of managing the growth of the plant. So whether it's weed management, whether it's what we do with the soil, because we do inoculate useful bacteria into the soil, whether it's the use of weed management, and all of those things are done differently. The age at which they were planted and the size they were planted. So all of that's tracked to really tell us what factors give us better results. And we're still, so, you know, give me 3 more years and we'll be able to tell you what those factors are. But as you can see, you know, just from this picture, so this is sort of just over 12 months of data. And I mean, you can see that the majority of them are tracking incredibly well and very few are tracking badly. So yeah, this is what they look like when they're first planted out. So it does look relatively mechanized, but when the tractor drives down the row with a planting wheel, you have a person sitting behind the tractor with some gloves on, and they reach in and grab one and stick it in the ground. So even though it's sort of mechanized, it's still very manual. So there's a lot of manual labor that goes in there. This is at about 6 months, and then this is at about 1 year, about 12 months old. One of the other things that we do is that we count the leaves, and that also tells you about its growth. So every leaf you've got to think about, in one sense, is like a solar panel. So the more leaves it has, the more energy it's driving. So the growth curve is exponential, you know, as it grows. So what you can see there's some larger ones, which are the ones closer to the camera, and smaller ones at the back. So they've had very different weed treatment. So the ones at the front there have been sort of manually cleaned and kept safe, and then the ones at the back have had a lot less care and attention. I mean, you can see they're almost twice the size. So this is from our sort of main research field. But you can see the difference that sort of land management has. Now I want to show you this one for a couple of reasons. So at about 1 year, we start to get pups, and we do get plenty of pups. And like I said, this is what we're now sort of planting out into the rest of the field. So we don't need to rely on tissue culture and those sorts of things. We've got enough pups to sort of keep us going. But I also wanted to show you, so this is a plastic mulch, so entirely non-recyclable, the worst sort of agronomy practices that are out there. But we did need to plant some rows with this to create a baseline. So while the plastic is not great on the environment, and it's really interesting because it's actually now completely illegal to dispose of. So we actually we'll send that down to Brisbane to go through it. There's a plastic pyrolysis machine down there, and that's pretty much the only way you can actually treat that plastic. And that banning the placing of that plastic in landfill has pretty much been what's driven most agronomy away from it as a solution, but it does give you excellent growth results. So what it does is it traps moisture in the soil, it stops evaporation, it also stops weed growth. So really, really positive. So we purposefully ran rows of this to create a research baseline. Now, in all of our fields, we track soil moisture, and we compare that to growth, and we compare that to our weather data. But what it also means is that we can create that baseline for soil moisture and plant health and growth, and then compare it to cover cropping. So this is what we started in start of 2021. Mid-2021, we had to wait for our seeder to arrive. So basically, we start, this is a field that we want to plant in about 6 months. We seed it out with a cover crop, all sorts of different legumes and grasses that are known to add nitrogen to the soil and give you really good soil health. This is them after it's only about 2 months. So they're growing well. The cover crops get to between 4 and 6 foot high, so really big. And then there's a process called crimping, which is basically a corrugated steamroller that rolls, well, it's not a steam, that you put on the tractor, and it rolls over, it folds them all down, and it crushes the stems, and it completely kills the plant, but it leaves all of that biomass to form what is effectively a completely biodegradable mulch across the top of the soil. And then once it's been crimped and we let it die back for a couple of weeks, we then go and actually plant the agave into that sort of natural mulch that goes on there. So by this time next year, we'll be able to tell you and compare how it goes against a baseline of plastic. We've also trialed biofilms. So there's some really good, cornstarch-based biofilm that can replace the plastic that obviously degrades and becomes a fertilizer. But it's just incredibly hard to find consistent supply. So you'll use one from a supplier and it'll be fantastic, and then you'll get the same supplier, a different roll next week, and it'll be gone in 2 weeks because it just hasn't. Anyway, a whole heap of problems with supply chain logistics with that, which is why we've put in the research and started this cover cropping piece, and obviously had to buy a seeder and buy a crimper and a few things like that. But yeah, we're really excited about that. It also really helps. We're going through a process of sequestering carbon in the soil. So, we're tracking that at the moment. We've done all that initial testing on the sort of the soil carbon when we took it over. And so, every year now, every month, I do 6 monthly testing, and every test that we've done, our soil carbon's going up and up. So we're doing a bit of reworking of the soil. So we're probably still not carbon negative in what we're doing, because the reworking of the soil, it releases carbon before it starts to draw it back down. So, but sort of well on their way to being quite carbon negative in what we do up there. We'll get to what the distillery will do to that in a little minute. So we should drink something. So in a glass with you, this is a trial that we've done. So this is actually a combination of Australian grown agave from that first harvest, but also we've bolstered that with some Mexican syrup to stretch it out, because we've been playing around with distillation and fermentation to see what those impacts are. What we're most happy with about what's in your glass is the elements that for me are probably close to like pear and lime peel and those sorts of flavors, and the texture. Really, really happy with the texture. Where we're not yet happy, and we're still doing more work and more trials, which we're running down at Anther in North Geelong. So Dervla and Joey and the team down there are actually running a lot of those agave trials. But what we're still working on is really that classic, Mexican nose, which we actually have done a couple of really small trials that have nailed it, but we haven't expanded that out yet. So that kicks off again at the end of March, sort of into April, and we'll start to do a little more. I'll give you just a really quick overview. We've obviously got a lot of agave in the ground, but we're not planning to harvest any till the back half of 2023. So that's our deadline to have our distillery built. And one of the challenges about building a distillery in sort of remote Australia is that there's nowhere near enough power on site, and we have to be self-sufficient of water. So all of those things. So the distillery, we actually have put orders in for stills and things like that. We're building ovens that will be a sort of an Australian version of a horno. So we'll probably actually use a metal skin rather than brick, and then backfill and cover them with soil as insulation rather than brick, just because of very different OH&S in Australia to Mexico. But there'll be ambient pressure steam ovens, so very similar to a horno that they would use in Mexico. We'll probably use repurposed sugar mill in terms of how we then process, which is, again, a lot of the distilleries in Mexico are doing that. And then we'll do some pressing, which we're still working on what that looks like. I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen Frankenstein at El Pandillo. Anyway, that's one of the better distilleries in Mexico. If you look up El Pandillo and Frankenstein, it's a glorious way to crush tequila, or crush the agave post milling. But the other thing that we're doing is we are putting in nearly a megawatt of solar, and that'll just be our sort of seed power to sort of get things moving. It actually won't be enough to drive the full distillery, but it'll allow us to do commissioning and trials. And then we're looking at a biomass boiler, and the biomass boiler will probably produce nearly twice the power that we need And so we'll be able to either feed that back into the grid, or we're currently talking to a hydrogen company at the moment, so they may be looking to put a converter on that patch of land on the other side of the highway to potentially store that power as hydrogen. But that'll be a baseload power, so that'll run, 24/7, and that'll process all of our biomass. So if we took all of the leaves and the leftover fibers and all of that sort of stuff and returned it as compost to put back into the land, that actually releases quite a lot of carbon dioxide during the process of composting. So we're looking into utilise this biomass boiler will release slightly less carbon dioxide, and then it'll give us a sort of biochar ash that we can use as fertiliser into the land. In terms of the water process, we've actually pretty closely matched well, we didn't do it, but when we looked at our sort of worst case scenario irrigation needs, because irrigation during the first year of the plant's life is really critical. And we do very light drip irrigation. So we're doing about 40 litres a plant over the course of a year, and sugarcane is, I think, at 40,000, something ridiculously high like that. So it's an incredible sort of measure of magnitude difference. But the waste water from distillation, so what comes out of the fermenter, goes through the still, we take out the alcohol, the glorious agave spirit, and we leave behind the water. So that water we actually store in a dam, and that'll be then utilised across the farm in that way. So we have access to the Bowen pipeline, which we're building a connection, so that'll be our sort of dilution and processed water. But then there's no sewer or anything like that. So everything that comes on site has to be processed on site, and we'll do everything farm to bottle. So we'll harvest, cook, mill, ferment, distill, age, mature, bottle, everything on site. And so it'll be, a 100%, carbon negative, farm to bottle, reasonably closed loop product, which is just incredibly exciting to sort of be involved in building. And I would love to show you pretty sort of pictures of the design of the building that the still's going to go in, but we haven't finished them yet. So so it is tight. We're very conscious that we need to get cracking on that, but we have actually just sorted some of our energy pieces, which is a much trickier conundrum and really expensive to become a power station as well as a distillery. But I think we found the way to thread that particular needle. Any questions? I'm hoping I can hear you all okay.
You talked about the challenges in harvesting. Have you worked out solutions to those challenges with
Yes, the challenges of the harvesting. That's correct. So we haven't finalised what that will be, but we do know that what we'll probably do is whole row. So we'll pull the whole plant, and then we are looking at designing right now a secondary process that will then take the whole plant, leaves and all, the whole penkers, and we just bring them out on the tractor, out of the field, back to the distillery, and then it'll go through, I guess, what we're looking at the moment, and we've started the design process, is like a pre-mill, and that'll effectively shave the pena, and then we would look at something semi-manual to split the pena, and then the bit of spike will fall out. And at the moment we're looking at quarter penas packed in baskets into our ovens, but we'll also trial half and cutting them down to 1/8 as well to see what that does in terms of cooking. But we'll definitely need to split them. So at the moment, the current plan is still in its infancy, but a tractor will pull the whole plant and then there'll be a pre-mill that can effectively shave them, shave the leaves and the penca off back at the distillery. So yeah, because Chris Monceau assures me that this won't be a problem, and that actually really, really modern farming doesn't have an issue harvesting strange things. And I sort of think, really? Okay. But so far on the agronomy side, he's been impeccably trustworthy. So I'm backing Chris has the solution in the bag.
Any more questions? Go ahead.
To know the guys wouldn't be full of right? You have to go in the wrong way. And to Kara's point that she said earlier, like obviously in this room, you've got people that are looking for niche and sort of know products and know things. But I guess with a more general audience, is there an education piece around, I guess, what the product will be and just educating customers? Because coming from a wine background, I'm sort of relating it to Prosecco and Glera, and Glera is not as sexy as Prosecco. So I'm just sort of, trying to see what your plan is.
So just to sort of confirm, the question at the heart of it is, what's our direction of product, and how do we allow people who are big fans of tequila and Mexico, but also people who want to explore a bit further, both approach, what we do and what we create? Is that sort of the question?
Absolutely. I guess the marketing.
Yeah. So we did we did have a little mantra for ourselves as we've been building out the brand work. We haven't finalized what the brand will look like. Otherwise, I would be presenting it today. But our mantra is, the world does not need another tequila brand, but I think that the world does need another region. In the same way that champagne has not been in any way slowed down or diminished by Australia making incredible sparkling wine. And also Australia has done very well by making sparkling wine and Shiraz and Pinot and Cabernet and all of those wonderful things. So we are looking at the wine industry, I guess, as a little bit of a path to see what worked really well with them. So definitely, terroir is critical, because we want to create a product that is uniquely Australian, but still accessible to an international customer and consumer. So we're definitely going to make a few different products. We definitely want to make something that is, for me, in terms of the work I'm doing on recipe, my sort of philosophy on it is low intervention. We want to take the plant from the ground, and we want to do as little as possible right through that sort of cooking, fermenting, distilling, to capture the flavor of that plant in a bottle. And that, for me, I want someone to be able to grab, a Fortaleza Blanco and an Australian Agave Blanco and put them in a glass and really be tasting the difference in region and terroir, rather than, differences in what we do in sort of production. But on the other side, we definitely want to make some products that challenge the status quo a little bit and bring a philosophy of, let's do everything we can to make the finest spirit from this agave. So if that means different types of ferment, different ways in which we would run the ovens, different ways that we would distill it, that's different from Mexico, let's do that, but always do it with a view to making something that is incredibly delicious. And again, true to the region and the plant.
I think we've got one more question.
I said you look glorious on our big TV. It's pretty amazing to see you using technology like drones and different pesticides to see essentially how you can speed run hundreds of years of culture from Mexico, which all was based around terroir and how to keep those plants safe and healthy. How important is the flavor profile of traditional Mexican tequila when you think about what kind of spirit you want to put out that represents Australian grown agave?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And it's really important because we are being, Mexican tequila is really, really good. So this isn't a project that sort of says, look, we wish those Mexicans were making better stuff. Again, those who haven't looked up El Pandillo, which make G4 and products like that, I mean, just incredible. So we definitely want to have, one eye on, being really respectful and learning what we can, from what they do in Mexico and the amazing products that they make. But we also need to be true to the region. And so some of the early trials that we did, and this is some product that we made back in 2019 from that very, very first harvest. So that was, we didn't have an opportunity to run trials. We just had sort of like a single shot at it. So in that regard, we played it very, very safe. And we did something that was very Mexican in its sort of style. And in fact, we had Ignacio Labrod, who's on the board of Jose Cuervo and is an agronomist with Salsa for many, many years before that. He was actually over in Australia and worked with us on the distillation because we knew we sort of only had one shot at it. And what we found with that distillation and that product, there may be there's very little of it. So there may be some samples that appear sort of later in the year. I'm sure if you all jump on Australian Agave, you can follow our social media and find out. But one of the things we found with that is that we were definitely able to bring to life and bring to the bottle that incredible, classic tequila, grassy, limey, beautiful tequila aroma. But then when you got into the palate, especially where products, look, it's a massive favorite of mine, but Fortaleza, it's a really sort of soft, it's got a real sort of gentle length to it. We certainly found the Australian agave was soft and minerally rather than soft and generous. So, whereas you might call Fortaleza, quite a sort of a nice round Chardonnay style, what was coming out for us was almost a more flinty, Chablis sort of style. So it was a little bit more structural and linear. So if that is true, and that was agave that was grown in Ayr, and Ayr is about 1 hour north of our farm, and it's in that same Queensland dry tropic microclimate. So our assumption, look, if we get that same flavor profile from the agave on our farm, I'll just be so wrapped because, for me, I love that style and it's delicious. And it's, a lover of tequila will love it. And a lover of tequila will be able to put it in a glass and say, hey, wait a minute, I haven't tasted this before. And that for me, if we can deliver that in the glass, that'd be amazing. But I won't know for another year and a half. Again, fingers crossed.
Okay, cool. I think that's what we have time for this. So thank you so much for that talk and all those questions, Seb. So that's the last formal speaker we have today. We now have something of a bit more of a conversation. So I'm going to get up 3 people here who are doing bottled cocktails. They're 3 really impressive people in our industry. So I think it's very interesting that's the route that they've all gone down, and they're going to have a bit of a chat with us. So we've got Michael from the Everleigh, we've got other Michael from Homegrown, and we've got Orlando from Loro. So they could all come up.
Hello. Who's going to speak first? Apparently me.
It's old stock. I don't know. A few years ago.
How's everyone going? Very quiet.
Hi.
Yeah, hi. Well, I guess I'm speaking first. My name is Orlando. Thank you, Jimmy. You left already. For the many, just there, for the many introduction, many references. Sorry, wrong time. Bottle cocktails. My brand is called Loro. In Italian means they, them. I often take all of the credit for creating these beautiful cocktails, but it will be nothing without the producers, farmers, growers, and distillers. So it's a nod to a lot of bunch of people. They don't come up as much as me in front of the labels. So that's why it's called Loro. The idea started mainly in 2018, perhaps a little bit earlier. By my bartender career, I was lucky enough to work in top cocktail bars, but also along many great chefs. I used to work at venues like Dinner by Heston, Lume Restaurant. We were sitting 40 lucky people on a Saturday night. If you could get a reservation, spend $950 and drink one of the probably 33 martini we will sell one night. And when in 2018, I was lucky enough to represent Australia globally and win World Class Bartender of the Year. When I came back, I looked at the opportunity to create something in my head back then. There was beyond a 20-seats venue and take that kind of approach to improve beverage experiences anywhere, anytime. And purely because people used to come at the bar and say, oh, this Martini Martinez, which was one of the cocktails that we used to make, yes, with a rotary evaporator distilled sweet vermouth, which was essentially a Martinez presented in a very martini way. People loved it, but then they would ask me, I'm getting married next week, or I got a function, can I buy a bottle? I'd love to host this with my friends next time. And we're like, no, it's only available here. No, we only do here. And so, well, very soon I realized that if you don't hang out in great cocktail bars, most of the time you have average drinks. And so this is why we then thought there would be a really great time to put world-class cocktails into a bottle in a way that people could discover flavor, firstly more than techniques. I am very lucky also to work with exceptional tools. As Jimmy said before, they are just tools. We don't put everything through a rotary evaporator, even though sometimes it seems I'm the brand ambassador for rotary evaporators in Australia. I have assembled 4 of the 5 that are available in Melbourne here. We don't use that all the time, and you don't need that to create exceptional drinks. I sit like in a purist kind of style. I have shared the same bars that Michael has shared in London. So my approach is firstly to look at the structure of some classic cocktails and really to integrate flavors. So, for example, one of the coffee that you tried is a coffee cocktail, and we highlight tonka bean, particularly along with vanilla and the flavor combinations of coffee. That was probably the shortest I can speak as an Italian. That's all right.
Well, yeah, I think what might be interesting now is I guess that's your reason for starting the brand Loro. So it would be really interesting to hear maybe from the other guys as well, I guess the motivating factor for getting into bottled cocktails and away from, I guess, what we all know, which is the bar.
My name's Michael. I have been producing bottled cocktails for about 7 years. Kind of came up out of more of a necessity for Broadsheet Restaurant that was opening at the time. They needed some bartenders, and we only had 4. So it was Zara that suggested, why don't we stick some of the more durable drinks in a bottle so that you can pour them out? To which Broadsheet were pretty thrilled with. They got to put out a good drink. They didn't need to rely on having really skilled servers behind the bar pouring them out. And so, yeah, that happened. We opened Heartbreaker that year, and we decided, well, I actually didn't want to do it, but we ended up just putting the bottled cocktails in the bar at Heartbreaker anyway, which did quite well. And again, look, what they did was give us an opportunity to put a quality, consistent product over the bar. And what we would say back then was quicker than you can pour a pint, which was amazing. And look, even catch me in a drunken conversation in certain places, and I'll tell you that sometimes, like, my bottled cocktails are way better than the drinks I can put over the bar at the Ev. It's because you can guarantee that consistency. You do have control over temperature. They are, in many ways, a superior, controlled, a perfect product. And look, it's been a long road for us. We copped a lot of flack in the early days. Everybody thought we were cheating, but we just kind of kept our heads down and just kept doing it. And it's been quite good. Look, I mean, COVID has been a great accelerator for packaged goods. So there are a lot of great products on the market now in a package, which is amazing because it gives us access to those places, those products more, which is fantastic. And for me, I guess the romance in a bottled cocktail, which is probably the thing that drives me most, is the fact that it is that constant communication to your customers. So if they can't make it into the bar to see you, to be in the venue, or to see the staff, kind of taking a bottle out of the fridge takes them back to a time when they were there. And look, for right now, I think in an industry that is losing romance by the day, I think it's really important that we do hold on to the romantic stuff to keep that kind of going a bit more.
We have come a long way with people's attitude towards them, for sure. I remember when White Lion first opened in London, people accused them of not being bartenders. It was really nasty, actually, at first. But it's amazing that people are at your venues and won't judge when they see someone reach into a bar now. Oh, sorry, a fridge.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm the other Michael. You mentioned White Lion. It was one of the very early inspirations for me. And then when we have a bar around the corner called Bar Liberty, that opened 6 years ago, and started seeing bottled cocktails really starting to emerge, and Michael and Zara at the Everleigh doing it and doing incredibly well. So we decided really early at Liberty to only have, as a wine bar primarily, but we wanted all the drinks to stand up on their own 2 feet, and we hated going to wine-focused venues that hardly could do a cocktail, or a beer-focused venue that had a crappy wine list. We thought everything needed to be at that level, and if anyone's been there, you can see it's a tiny, tiny bar. So we decided straight away to just do bottled cocktails. And off the back of that, and seeing the industry really change over the years, COVID happening, we started to see the meeting point of two huge things from a timing perspective. So a massive staffing shortage that we all know we're in right now, and then cocktail culture just exploding. So you're seeing beer slowly decline, wine in certain places is declining in venues, whereas cocktails keep emerging, especially in the sort of lower ABV spritzy styles. And we saw that and saw the opportunity to create a product that we wanted to champion all Australian spirit producers in on-premise venues primarily, and help venues that don't necessarily have the bar staff to execute those cocktails at scale. And as Michael touched on, like being able to repeat it at the same quality level again and again and again, and able to get a cocktail in people's hands extremely good, as fast as pouring a beer. And we're only 6 months old, but seeing awesome success in the on-premise space, and are really excited for the next 6 months, the next 12 months, and what is emerging. We take a lot of inspiration from people up here, but also from Seb at Top Shelf, and them really trying to put Australian spirits forward. I think the percentage is pretty wild, but it's only 8% of spirits consumed in Australia are Australian.
Yeah, that really shocked me when I found that out.
Yeah, that really shocked us as well. Actually, Seb was the one that said that to us probably 18 months ago. And given what we do at Worksmith and all the great brands we work with in our membership base and through partnerships with Melbourne Cocktail Festival, so we really wanted to support them. So, our dream is to be the biggest buyer of Marionette, of MGC, of our mates that we've seen produce incredible drinks on our home soil, and be able to put them into large-scale venues at scale cocktail to really get more Australian spirits in front of people and actually give people a product in venue that helps their venue move forward.
So is this how bottled cocktails, how we essentially, I guess, get like mainstream drinkers into cocktails?
Yeah, and that was a primary focus for us, in particular for homegrown, is that I think it was Jimmy that said it about being, we are flavour forward, and we have that same sort of mentality of we want to demystify cocktails. Like I love classics, I really do. I love, Cara was touching on it in her talk about being at the pointy end of the industry. Love what we do in our venues, but I had the understanding really quickly that that's the 5%, that's the 10% of people that understand the level in which we go to produce great drinks in venue. So we wanted to create a brand that was really was easy to decipher for the everyday punter. I think most people do this, but I always use my parents as that. It's just like put it in front of them, don't say anything. What do they think it is? By the label, do they enjoy the drink? Is it easy to understand? And that's really worked well for us with the homegrown cocktails so far.
Yeah, and Michael, you're in like supermarkets now, aren't you? Especially with the Bellini.
Yes, yeah. The non-alc Bellini released this year, which has been great. Just gone into Coles recently, yeah.
It's pretty mainstream.
Which is pretty, yeah. And look, it's great. At the end of the day, I think we were pretty protective in the early days with the brands, but at the same time, you are creating a commercial product, and we have a responsibility to our teams, and we have to pay people, and we have to move into bigger warehouses. So you do start to talk to the larger buyers, which. It was really scary at first, but actually seeing the appetite from some of the big ones is really impressive. So I think for me, maybe one of the great things I've learned this year by talking to the big guys is the fact that they're really keen to do better, and I think that was really special. So for us, we're super excited to be included.
And Orlando, I guess when you've only just launched, so this might be a bit like.
We are not at Coles.
No, I know, you're not at Coles. I
Yet.
don't think at Coles have alcohol just yet. One can only hope we go back to the UK model. But I was going to ask, I guess, where are you seeing your brand, like, I guess, where consumers can access it? Is it mostly in venue when they're kind of accessing those cocktails that the bartender couldn't make, or do you see it more as like something to have at home?
Great question. The idea, what I thought was the second one. It was available for any day drinkers that want to improve their beverage experiences at home. But with the current situation in the hospitality industry, we see people on trade, particularly those restaurants, they don't operate massive scale, so they don't need to have a bar manager, 2 creative head bartenders, 2 supervisors, and all of that to create a 6 drinks cocktail menu. That's probably where our drinks can sit on and give a little bit of a twist to the classics, let's say. So a little bit of both.
Yeah, sure. I think this is interesting so I have a boss in the UK called Simon Difford who is very old school. He started in 1997 and he hates bottled cocktails because he experienced them in the 90s and they were, we were talking like WKD and I think like more like cruises is where his head is at when I talk about bottled cocktails. So when I'm like, hey, you should try the new ones out there, let's get these on the site, he's like, absolutely not. And I imagine he's not the only one who's had those experiences, right? Like back when there was sour mix and stuff going on. So how do you bring people into the new world of bottled cocktails where it's like super delicious and not going to like perish in a day?
That's a great question. Like we are probably the pioneers in this panel, or we hope so, particularly here in Melbourne, Australia. But one of the earliest mention of bottled cocktails dates back from the 1900s. During the Futurism in Italy, during the lush days in Milan, Campari soda was born purely to focus on customer service rather than drinks making, because the Americanos and everyone was drinking Campari and soda. It was very, very cool to see you drinking something red with soda. Back in the days, all of the Amari were dark, and Campari was the first to come up with a really beautiful color. And so it's kind of done. And we are repolishing, I think. And of course, if you are a little bit of a purist and you don't give a chance, then probably you close an opportunity to be open to those that put a lot of effort. in creating exceptional beverages that, yes, at the end of the day, they are packaged, but there are people behind with a lot of expertise and passion to make them to the highest quality.
I'm going to tell Simon you said that.
Yeah, please, please. This is streamed line.
Yeah,
but-
yeah. Do you guys want to answer that as well? You're all good. Okay. Does anyone, by the way, want to jump in and have a chat with the guys about bottle cocktails? This doesn't have to just be me, if you want.
Probably for you, Everleigh Bottling Co. I've woken up in hotel rooms with empty bottles in my bed. Mate, it's everywhere. First of all, congratulations on all the products are great. Coming from more of a brand perspective and as a bartender, I do understand the logistics of doing it through a small high street shop, but what you guys are doing is what I consider a small production run for 4 Pillars, for example, right? How do you guys do it? And obviously, logistically, you've got glass, caps, liquid, labels, and then manpower, right?
I'm so glad none of my guys in the warehouse are here right now. So the boys have coined the effect on your hand, bottler's thumb, by hand sealing each one of the classics. We look, up until probably about 6 months ago, had single unit filling machines, and we were doing 25,000 units a month. We were labeling by hand up until December, and sanitizing. So yeah, we were doing everything in probably some of the dumber ways. But machinery costs money, you know? Yeah. So look, we were, I guess, with the increase in revenue with COVID and lockdown, I think it gave us an opportunity to buy some more machinery so the guys could actually let their hands heal a little bit. And we've got, a labeling machine now, and we've got a bigger filler, definitely very small in regards to, I guess, against 4 Pillars. But and we've just moved into our new warehouse in Port Melbourne this week. So yeah, we're actually, finally being able to give them a little more freedom and time to heal and space, and they'll start liking me a little bit more again, which is good. Once I put the pool table in the new office, they'll be super happy. What was the question? How do we do it? We've been doing it like garage style for quite some time, handmade. The carbonated ones, like the Americanos you see today, we have, and the Bellinis, we have filled for us. Carbonation is a black art. You know all about this, so it's a bit of a tough one. So we use Encore down in Dandenong. They fill all our carbonated beverages. Mm-hmm.
Kind of a similar story for us. On top of that, we do make our own macerations and infusions. So there is the extra step that just prior to mix, for example, the Negroni recipe, which we have a vermouth blend, so 2 types of vermouth, 2 types of bitter, and we also infuse into bergamot. For the coffee cocktail that you had, it's probably one of the most complicated because which is not that one that we use a rotary evaporator, for example. We do cut every single piece of vanilla. If there is any chef in the room, you know that you can't just blitz vanilla through a Thermomix. Yeah, why not? That's right. You can. And we don't use any flavors. So like as, additional made who knows what kind of flavors. So we do extract real flavors. I was just talking to Tim earlier on. We do buy tonka bean from Brazil. It comes $1,000 a kilo, imported from an Italian in Australia. Can sound a little bit dodgy as well. It is tonka bean that we import. Tonka bean needs to be grated by hand. It needs to be dry enough to be grated and not too dry. That smells like nothing. If you have a smelt tonka bean. So we get quite fussy with the ingredients. The vanilla, we cut the ends off. Then with the back of the knife, you need to kind of flatten it, then cut it in the middle, and then scrap it. Repeats there for about 1.5 kilos for a 500 liters batch. It takes 4.5 hours. It's all obviously costed and calculated, and the thing that we can never take off, on top of the bottle, there is my name. So, it can't be 9.5, it needs to be 10.
Thanks, man. We use for our drinks, or first of all, we use a third party, like Michael was saying, for the spritzers, because ours are all carbonated, so we do not want to touch carbonation in-house at that level, which helps us a hell of a lot with production. The flavours we use are all cold distilled, so very similar to the rotary evaporator system that the guys are talking about, and we put them together. We've got a drinks lab in the CBD in our worksmith space, and we collaborate with bartenders that work within the worksmith space or within our membership base to create them. So a lot of them are made by the Fancy Free guys that have just opened their first bar, Caretaker's Cottage, in the CBD, and then Nick Tessar, which the drink you tasted today, the Sparkling Negroni, put that together. It's got Marinette bitter in there as well. But from a production standpoint, we do all the R&D, but then hand it over for production.
Was there a question over here?
I just wanted to ask from a brand perspective in regards to bottled cocktails that you're selling for retail. Is the focus or the idea trying to recreate the authenticity and the organic nature of having a cocktail behind the bar, or is it about simplicity and ease of use at home?
What's the last one, sorry?
Is it about simplicity or ease of use at home, or is it about trying to create authenticity and organic?
You want to start with this, Michael?
A little bit passionate about this one, even though I do have bottled cocktails. I don't think a bottled cocktail should ever replace the experience you have in a bar. I think the experience you have in a bar is special when it's good. I strongly believe that a bottled cocktail should just be a continued conversation of your experience with that bar, with that place that you do really enjoy. It should never replace the experience that you have at all. For the same reason, I keep my own drinks in the fridge as well. Even when I reach, even though it's mine, but even when I do reach into the fridge to grab mine, I do think about the people who've filled the bottles, and I think about the guys with Bottler's Thumb, and I have a real strong connection and appreciation. And for me, like I said, the romance is really important and the connection. So when people are buying my products, when I see somebody grab something of mine off the shelf, I'm deeply touched, because that is hopefully somebody that has been a customer, has had a great experience, and wants to remember that time with us.
Yeah, that question is very popular, and I often use the analogy of it's like the reason why you go to a concert, because the music, the experience, the millions of people, the adrenaline, and why you keep you listen to the same music at home on Spotify. Spotify is your bottle cocktail that just gets you the memory back and entertain your people, and the concert will never be gone because of the bottle cocktail.
I hate to repeat, but absolutely, I'm an absolute lover of hospitality and being in bars and creating what we have with Homegrown. We never want to strip that away by any stretch of the imagination. For us, it's about getting great drinks in front of more people, and yeah, that should never replace that incredible experience that people can have at great cocktail bars.
It's a really good analogy, Orlando.
Can I add something else? You're also talking to an Italian and two background Italians, so we get very emotional when we speak about cocktails. And it is really nice, because until you see the bottles, probably something that we learned, because we are bartenders, we hospitality first. There is probably people that are more experienced into the marketing and the branding than us, I should say. And until you actually get the bottle, it's just another pretty bottle on a shelf. And the moment you actually buy that product and you share it at home, you kind of already engaged once, and then when you share it, just the experience gets better and better and better. So
we were laughing earlier that we had 3 kind of semi-Italians up here who all bottled a Negroni.
Semi, I'm fully.
Sorry.
According to the DNA registry, is 97% Italian.
97%. Sorry, there was another question over here.
You might have just answered this question, but what you guys do is off-premise. If you take your products and put them on-premise, which we do constantly getting criticism via social media for doing that. Clearly, there's a perception around someone actually making a cocktail and shaking it in front of you, as opposed to quickly dispensing it. But the product is identical, if not better. And like you mentioned, it's more consistent when it comes out of the bottle of the can. Why is there this pushback on premise?
I don't get it. I like. There's been pushback for years. Keep your head down and keep doing it. And keep making people feel good. I think if people come into your venue, make them feel special. The bottled cocktail, if it's made and it's delicious and it's fantastic, then honestly, if they feel special with the hospitality you're giving them, then that won't be an issue. But if they don't, then fuck them. Sorry, excuse me.
Which you would think would be a better experience for people, but we keep getting this pushback. It's quite strange.
Just hold your ground. We are about to open a new restaurant with a bar that has all of our drinks packaged only, so no shakers in this bar as well. Kind of like Heartbreaker, but less beer, and all our sparkling range on tap, and our bottles behind you in the bottle. So we'll be pouring from our vessels, and that's our whole bar. That's our whole kind of thing. So if you know what you're doing is right, and you're passionate about it, and you care about people, then you can't be doing anything wrong. Sorry?
It's arbitrary.
I think there is also that kind of hospitality delivery of a product that is easy to transmit to the person. I'll take the example last time I was behind the bar and pouring the Martini Martinez. I was telling you about it. So if you just put in a glass and walk away because you pre-batch it because it's faster, then it kind of shows nothing fancy or appealing or that you made better. If the same drink is considered and explained, and rather than wait for 12 minutes on Friday night at 9:30 p.m. to make a Negroni, you can tell about the difference, the vermouth that you used in the Negroni, and why do you use bergamot, and why you picked bright bergamot rather than Calabrian bergamot and whatnot. So I think there is also the hospitality part needs to be very, very important, because we batch it. Doesn't mean it needs to be thrown in front of the guest or needs to be like cheapen the experience of the guest having it.
I think harking back to when we first opened Bar Liberty and only doing bottled cocktails and still charging the same amount as what a shaken one would be. We got heaps and heaps of pushback at the start, and there was a tiny moment. There was a moment in time where we all sort of sat down as owners and said, "Well, we're doing the right thing. Should we change it?" And I think the overwhelming response from everyone was just kind of sort of stand your ground, as we're all sort of saying, and keep over-delivering on everything else to make the whole experience great. And did we lose people? Absolutely. But 6 years on, we're still there somehow, so we must be doing something right. And I think where great venues kind of stand the test of time, whether you're talking about bottled cocktails or something out there that's on the food menu or whatever else, is that if you believe it's great and you constantly have more people coming in for that thing that they keep coming back for versus the few that are complaining on Google, then you're doing the right thing at the end of the day. And it will stand the test of time.
Was there a question here?
Is there a difference in your creative process when you're building a cocktail for a bottle versus a cocktail individually? And do you think maybe it's the difference in that creativity that sometimes people think that because they don't get to see that process and they don't understand it?
Yeah, I think for homegrown, for us, we take the approach of using ingredients that are stabilised mainly, so then we can put it in bottle and scale it. The last thing I would ever want is a bottle exploding on a shelf somewhere that's sat there for 3 months. That scares me. So the approach is completely different for us in terms of how we do
it. Fairly similar when it comes to ingredients. Obviously, you need to make sure that the ingredients are stabilized. The same the way I think about flavor hasn't changed from when I was thinking behind the bar. If anything, actually improved, because now I understand better how to scale. But if I can add something else to your question, is it changed and I discovered with making bottled cocktails that is not simply as, for example, one of the martini that we have when we start to experiment it, we use the recipe of a martini saying 70 mils of gin, 10 of dry vermouth, and then stirred, and then check how much dilution was added. And then in a bottled cocktail is not the same, because we factor in that we say to the back of the bottle, please keep the glass in the freezer, keep the bottle in the refrigerator at least an hour prior serving. Who's going to do that? You know, hopefully everyone does it. But I also imagine, you know, someone forgetting about someone's birthday, or not having the right glass, not having them in the freezer, not having the bottle at the right temperature. So we kind of adjusted a little bit the way we think as a bartender. Same with the coffee cocktail. We didn't take the recipe of espresso martini, add the dilution, and put it in a bottle. We looked at different coffee. And then I was going around coffee roastery that I like, and then I ended up, that was also wrong, because I didn't need to go around the roastery that I like. I needed to find the coffee that was going to end up in the bottle, which was a cold extraction of coffee. And so, yeah, different angles.
I think with the sparkling, with the carbonated range, that one there was really important to get right, especially the non-alcoholic Bellini. So I guess tons and tons of testing, tons of trials, right? Giving it to as many people as you can and getting feedback. It's really important with, I guess, drinks that have citrus and natural flavors in it, that they aren't coming out too sweet. So there's a lot of trial and error that has to happen. We're working on another 3 at the moment, which have gone way over the time that's been allowed, because we just can't seem to get to a happy place with it, you know. Trial and error, like, it just takes time and it takes a lot of opinion, and you just need to kind of figure out where you want to position it. And then, like you said, to scale, it has to be, it's got to be right. Yeah, and especially when you're doing it with a third party, like for Encore, it's 2,500 litres per SKU. So that's 15,000 bottles per run. So if you fuck that up, then you're in big trouble. Yeah.
I'm not actually on the panel, but if I could just add to this really quickly, because I used to work at, for the White Lion Group. Their cocktails in bottles were built to be cocktails in bottles, right? And then one of the girls entered a cocktail competition and she had to reverse engineer it. So she had to turn it into a cocktail that wasn't in a bottle. And it was really challenging. So that was a really interesting way to kind of see, when you're so clearly making it for a bottle format, it doesn't actually naturally become a cocktail in a glass that you can shake up. Just as a, yeah. There was a question over here.
I've really enjoyed the ability to rebalance drinks when comparing them on a large scale and have a look at the individual ingredients and what ratios and how I'm using them. Have you discovered any tips or upsides to preparing cocktails en masse?
Well, there are 5 vermouths in my Americano. So yeah.
What I can think of is, like, again, we probably say rotary evaporator 10 times today, but that was probably the easiest part. The most difficult part was maceration. In one of the other cocktails, which is a cherry and cacao Manhattan, one thing that we didn't know and quickly learn about chocolate, the real chocolate, is really fatty. And you can strain sediments and not necessarily fat, because it melts. Right. Yeah. So that was interesting. But then we learn from different techniques how to filter. We normally go through different stages. Rather, everyone speaks about a very, very fine filtration to a point of a micron. So very, very, very fine. Basically, what you filter your filter coffee. If you go through that, we want to extract 1/10 of the Manhattan. So we can't do that straight away. We need to go through a coarser filtration, then a little bit smaller, and finally a very, very fine filtration. That's hopefully that plays your question.
I think for us, it's about widening the base of flavors that you can work with at scale. That makes sense. And looking at ingredients that you wouldn't necessarily look at if you're a bartender behind a bar shaking cocktails. And that's looking at, whether you need to balance with acid or sugar or whatever else, and really starting to think outside the box as to what can help you scale and balance at the same time, which we found really interesting across a lot of our drinks as we were sort of building them up. Michael mentioned before, minimum runs of 2,500 units get really scary if you get it wrong. And we're on to kind of batch number 5 or number 4, and we've adjusted as well, because they have, when you test something at this at 100 litres and then you jump it up, it changes a lot. So making those adjustments and as you go, I think is really important as well.
Actually, sometimes they work in your benefit. For example, in let's say you infuse in coriander seeds in a liter of gin, so you normally do 10%, which actually is quite high for coriander seeds, but let's just say that. And then if you need to do 100 liters, that 10% is too much. So something that gin distillers will know. And then if you scale that up again, then end up to be really, really a lot. So sometimes that's working in your favor.
It's a crazy amount of knowledge to have when you think about someone might value like a 3-ingredient shaken cocktail more. So hopefully that's just a thing that's going to slowly start to change as well. I always think about how London bartenders used to stir an old-fashioned for like 10 minutes before they gave it to you. I don't think that happens as much anymore, so we're getting there. I think that might be time. Yeah, thank you so much for everyone coming and paying attention, and to all our speakers. We really appreciate it. So, and